Hey, what's going on guys? My name's Sanguine, and what I got for y'all today is a video that breaks down the release schedule of one of the biggest game development studios in the entire video games industry, Bethesda Game Studios. Bethesda Game Studios has put out some of the most influential and successful games that this industry has ever seen. These include the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, Fallout 3, and the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Their success with these titles caused them to become one of the most respected and recognized development studios in the world. That is until the release of Fallout 76, which caused Bethesda's reputation, which was already on shaky grounds thanks to the less than amazing reception of Fallout 4, to go effectively in the dumpster. Anyways, I wanted to do this video because I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there about when their new games are going to be coming out. There's kind of just this general consensus that, oh, Starfield is a few years out, the Elder Scrolls VI is a few more years out, and who knows after that. I think that it's a little bit more clear cut than this, and this video is going to explain why. Okay, it all starts with a podcast that Todd Howard, the director and executive producer of Bethesda Game Studios, decided to go on back in March of 2018. In this podcast, Howard explains that their games take 3 to 5 years to make. I'll play the clip.
How long did it take you to make that call? Is it months, years?
And the other one with that is they go throughout the project. That's real, if you, I think most developers who have worked on games that take, 3 to 5 years that our stuff takes.
This didn't really come as a shock to any of us fans of the studio, since we already knew approximately how often their games released. But, in the case of this video, it allows us to definitively conclude that Bethesda Game Studios will release a game every 3 to 5 years, and this is reflected in the release dates of their previous games, which I'll discuss later. The next thing that happened was E3 2018. Todd Howard got up on stage and not only discussed Fallout 76, but revealed their next 2 upcoming single-player RPGs, Starfield and the Elder Scrolls VI. Starfield was revealed to be a brand new IP, but little information was given other than it would be a sci-fi space RPG. Little to no information was also given regarding the Elder Scrolls VI, other than the fact that it exists. Bethesda immediately let everyone know that these reveals were just a roadmap of what's to come from them in the future. The next piece of evidence comes from an interview with Pete Hines, Bethesda's Senior Vice President of Marketing, conducted by Eurogamer. In the interview, Eurogamer asked, "When should we expect to hear more about Starfield and the Elder Scrolls VI?" Hines' response was, "A while from now, and a really long while from now, respectively." Actually, I should not be quite so dismissive of the question, which is to say, the time frame for Bethesda Game Studios titles has not changed at all. What changed was our desire to lay out a roadmap of those titles, not like, hey, they're going to be putting out a game every 9 months. No, it still takes them years in between projects, but because we were doing something so different on Fallout 76, taking that franchise in such a different direction, doing an online game that doesn't look like something you'd expect from BGS, we thought it was important to say, hey, new IP, single-player, sci-fi thing coming. Hey, we're doing the Elder Scrolls VI after that. So that people didn't start spinning off on like, best end of single-player games from Bethesda Game Studios. Time frame-wise, it would still be about as long as you'd expect when you look at Fallout 3 to Skyrim to Fallout 4 to Fallout 76. It's still going to be those periods of time. That hasn't changed. Or at least, I don't think it will change from that based on what I know. So, Hines' response here basically just reaffirms the 3 to 5 year release cycle. Alright, so from this point on in the video, I'm going to be breaking down the release dates for Bethesda Game Studios' next 3 major titles using the information from both Todd Howard's and Pete Hines' interviews. That being that Bethesda Game Studios will release a title every 3 to 5 years. The way that I'm going to do this is by breaking down the possible release dates into 3 different schedules and creating a range. The 3 different categories will be best case scenario, worst case scenario, and worst case scenario. For the sake of this video, we're going to assume that Bethesda's next release after the Elder Scrolls VI will be Fallout 5, because at that point we will have waited a long time since the last single-player Fallout game. It very well may not be though. It could be Starfield 2 or even Elder Scrolls VII for all we know. But we're just going to say that it's Fallout 5 for convenience's sake. Alright, one last thing before I get into it. It has been confirmed that Starfield has been in full production since 2015, so I'm going to take this into account for the best case scenario release schedule. But before I do that, I'm going to look at Bethesda Game Studios' past releases to get an idea of what we're looking at. So, since 2002, Bethesda has released 6 AAA video games. The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind in 2002, the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion in 2006, Fallout 3 in 2008, the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim in 2011, Fallout 4 in 2015, and Fallout 76 in 2018. The average gap between releases between the years of 2002 and 2018 for Bethesda game studios is between 3 and 4 years. So, for the best case scenario, I'm going to use Bethesda's shortest average gap between every coming release. But I'm also going to set the gap between Fallout 76 and Starfield as 2 years since Starfield went into full development in 2015. This would put Starfield at 2020, The Elder Scrolls VI at 2023, and Fallout 5 at 2026. If you wanted, you could push Starfield's release date back a year in this scenario, as a 2020 release for it is highly unlikely. Now, this is the absolute best case scenario, so don't get your hopes too high for this actually happening. Up next is the worst case scenario. In this scenario, I'm going to set the gaps between games at 4 years because it's the higher actual average gap between Bethesda's past releases. This would put Starfield at 2022, The Elder Scrolls VI at 2026, and Fallout 5 at 2030. Lastly, we have the worst case scenario, which puts a 5-year gap between releases. This one would put Starfield at 2023, The Elder Scrolls VI at 2028, and Fallout 5 at 2032. This one is highly unlikely, but I thought I'd include it based on the fact that Todd Howard said in his interview that game development takes about 3 to 5 years, even though I realized that he was probably talking about the industry as a whole and not BGS specifically. Alright, so since we established all the possibilities, it's time to make the ranges so we can form a release window for each of the 3 titles. Starting with Starfield, the release range is going to be between the years of 2020 and 2023. The Elder Scrolls VI's range is between the years of 2023 and 2028. And lastly, Fallout 5's range sits between the years of 2026 and 2032. One last thing that's worth noting is the respective time spent in development for each of these games. Morrowind spent 4 years in development, Oblivion spent 4 as well, Fallout 3 spent 6, Skyrim spent 4, Fallout 4 spent 7 in total, 4 in full development, and lastly, Fallout 76 spent 4. While I think that these are important, I didn't factor them into the release date scenarios too heavily because I think that Bethesda's timeline is a bit more scheduled. What I mean by that is, I think that Bethesda's parent company, ZeniMax, has things a little bit more planned out in terms of their fiscal earnings. Like, they're most likely not going to release a game from BGS, Arcane, and id all in the same year, and they're also not going to give Bethesda 10 years to make a game. They probably have a set window for each of Bethesda's games. Furthermore, a game could be conceptualized 10 years prior to its release, so overall, the time a game spends in development doesn't tell us much. Alright, this part of the video is going to consist of my predictions. My predictions are going to be kind of conservative because I think that Bethesda is going to take its time with its next couple of games. The reason that I think this is because Bethesda has dug themselves a really deep hole with Fallout 76 and even Fallout 4 to some extent. So if they want to earn back the trust of their fans, they're going to have to put some serious work into these games. Alright, with that being said, here are my predictions. I have Starfield coming out in 2021, The Elder Scrolls VI dropping in 2025 or 2026, probably 2025, and finally, I have Fallout 5 dropping in 2029. So, let me break down my thought process on these. First, Starfield. We know that Starfield has been in full development since 2015. We know that Pete Hines told us to expect about the same amount of time between releases for Starfield and The Elder Scrolls VI, and we know that Starfield is being developed for next-gen consoles. So the most reasonable place to put Starfield is in 2021, since that will have allowed 3 years to pass since Fallout 76's release, and also allowed the next-gen consoles to have come out. Next, The Elder Scrolls VI. Putting The Elder Scrolls VI at 2025 is my prediction, because having it released 4 years after Starfield seems the most likely, because Bethesda's games usually come out every 3 to 4 years, and The Elder Scrolls VI seems to be one of Bethesda's bigger projects. I threw the possibility of a 2026 release date in my prediction, because there are rumors that The Elder Scrolls VI might be Bethesda Game Studios' most ambitious project to date. Combine that with the fact that it took them 3 years to make Fallout 76, which is a game without NPCs or anything that really requires a whole lot of writing or storytelling. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that it releases a year later than usual, but I definitely think that 2025 is the more likely of the 2 years. Alright, lastly, Fallout 5. Fallout 5 or Starfield 2 or The Elder Scrolls VII or whatever game that this is kind of the outlier because it's so far away. My best guess for it would be 2029 because that would put a 4-year gap in between it and The Elder Scrolls VI, and that's Bethesda's typical MO. Anyways, as you all can see, the waits for these games could be semi-decent or possibly quite long. Regardless, I'm excited for all of them. I know a lot of you might be a little bit more skeptical of these games, and especially Starfield, since it's a new IP, and I am too. I'm skeptical, but I'm also excited because I grew up playing Bethesda's games, and I think that despite their recent shortcomings and dumbing down of RPG mechanics ever since Morrowind, they are still a talented development studio. So I'm holding out hope that they can turn things around and redeem themselves. Alright guys, that's going to wrap it up for me today. I hope this video really cleared up any misconceptions you might have had, or just kind of shed some light on when these games could be coming. But yeah, that's going to be it guys. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, leave a like and or a comment if you enjoyed, and I will catch y'all in the next video.